Hi, my name is Lynne Miller. I'm at the Swansea Public Library in Swansea, Massachusetts, and I'm reading a passage from To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This book was banned and challenged when I was in high school. One day we were reading it, the next day it was collected. It seems that someone in our class had taken the book home and a parent had objected to it. Because this parent knew many people in Swansea, the books were quickly collected, and my friend and I had to go home and read it on our own. The passage I'm reading is when they try to break Boo Radley out of jail. We were taking a shortcut across the square when 4 dusty cars came in from the Meridian Highway, moving slowly in a line. They went around the square, past the bank building, and stopped in front of the jail. Nobody got out. We saw Atticus look up with his newspaper. He closed it, folded it deliberately, dropped it in his lap, and pushed his hat to the back of his head. He seemed to be expecting them. "Come on," whispered Jem. We streaked across the square, across the street, until we were in the shelter of the Jitney Jungle door. Jem peeked up the sidewalk. "We can get closer," he said. We were into Tyndall's hardware door, near enough and at the same time discreet. In ones and twos, men got out of cars. Shadows became substance as lights revealed solid shapes moving toward the jail door. Atticus remained where he was. The men hid him from view. "He in there, Mr. Finch?" a man said. "He is," we heard Atticus answer, "and he's asleep. Don't wake him." In obedience to my father, they followed what I later realized was a sickeningly comic aspect of an unfunny situation. The men talked in mere whispers. "You know what we want," another man said. "Get aside from the door, Mr. Finch." "You can turn around and go home again, Walter," Atticus said pleasantly. "Heck Tate's around somewhere." "The hell he is," said another man. "Heck's sponged so deep in the woods they won't get him out till morning." "Indeed? Why so?" "Called him off to a snipe hunt," was the succinct answer. "Didn't you think of that, Mr. Finch?" "Thought about it, but didn't believe it." "Well, then," my father's voice was still the same. "That changes things, doesn't it?" "It do," another deep voice said. Its owner was a shadow. "Do you really think so?" This was the second time I heard Atticus ask that question in 2 days, and it meant somebody's man would get jumped. This was too good to miss. I broke away from Jem and ran as fast as I could to Atticus. Jem shrieked and tried to catch me, but I had a lead on him and Dill. I pushed my way through the dark, smelly bodies and burst into a circle of light. "Hey, Atticus!" I thought he would have a fine surprise, but his face killed my joy. A flash of plain fear was going out of his eyes, but remained when Dill and Jem wriggled into the light. There was a small smell of stale whiskey and pig pen about. When I glanced around, I discovered that these men were strangers. They were not the people I saw last night. Hot embarrassment shot through me. I had leapt triumphantly into a ring of people I had never seen before. Atticus got up from his chair, but he was moving slowly, like an old man. He put the newspaper down very carefully, adjusting its creases with lingering fingers. They were trembling a little. "Go home, Jem," he said. "Take Scout and Dill home." We were accustomed to prompt, if not always cheerful acquiescence to Atticus's instructions, but from the way he stood, Jem was not thinking of budging. "Go home, I said." "Son, I said go home." Jem shook his head. "I'll send him home," a burly man said, and grabbed Jem roughly by the collar. He yanked Jem nearly off his feet. "Don't you touch him!" I kicked the man swiftly, barefooted. I was surprised to see him fall back in real pain. I intended to kick his shin, but aimed too high. "That'll do, Scout." Atticus put his hand on my shoulder. "Don't kick folks," he said, as I was pleading justification. "Ain't nobody gonna do Jem that way," I said. "All right, Mr. Finch, get him out of here," someone growled. "You got 15 seconds to get him out of here." I looked toward the crowd. It was a summer night, but the men were dressed, most of them, in overalls and denim shirts buttoned up to the collar. I thought they must be cold-natured, as their sleeves were unrolled and unbuttoned at the cuffs. Some wore hats pulled firmly down over their ears. They were sullen-looking, sleepy-eyed men who seemed unused to late hours. I sought once more for a familiar face, and at the center of a semicircle I found one. "Hey, Mr. Cunningham!" The man did not hear me, it seemed. "Hey, Mr. Cunningham, how's your entailment getting along?" Mr. Walter Cunningham's legal affairs were well known to me. Atticus had once described them at length. The big man blinked and looked hooked his thumbs in his overall straps. He seemed uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and looked away. My friendly overture had fallen flat. "Don't you remember me, Mr. Cunningham? I'm Jean Louise Finch. You brought us some hickory nuts one time, remember?" I began to sense the futility one feels when unacknowledged by a chance acquaintance. "I go to school with Walter," I began again. "He's your boy, ain't he? Ain't he, sir?" Mr. Cunningham was moved to a faint nod. He did know me, after all. "He's in my grade," I said. "And he does write well. He's a good boy," I added. "A real nice boy. We brought him home for dinner one time. Maybe he told you about me. I beat him up one time, but he was real nice about it. Tell him hey for me, won't you?" Atticus has said it was the polite thing to talk to people about what they were interested in, not what you were interested in. Mr. Cunningham displayed no interest in his son, so I tackled his entailment once more, in a last-ditch effort to make him feel at home. "Entailments are bad," I was advising him, when I slowly awoke to the fact that I was addressing the entire aggregation. The men were all looking at me. Some had their mouths half open. Atticus had stopped poking at Jem. They were standing together beside Still. Their attention mounted to fascination. Atticus's mouth, even, was half open, an attitude he had once described as uncouth. Our eyes met, and he shut it. "Well, Atticus, I was just saying to Mr. Cunningham that entailments are bad, and all that. But you said not to worry. It takes a long time sometimes. That you'll all write it out together." I was slowly drying up, wondering what idiocy I had committed. Entailment seemed all right enough for living room talk. I began to feel sweat gathering at the edges of my hair. I could stand anything but a bunch of people looking at me. They were all quite still. "What's the matter?" I asked. Atticus said nothing. I looked around and up at Mr. Cunningham, whose face was equally impassive. Then he did a peculiar thing. He squatted down and took me by both shoulders. "I'll tell him you said hey, little lady," he said. Then he straightened up and waved his big paw. "Let's clear out," he called. "Let's get home, boys." As they had come in ones and twos, the men shuffled back to their ramshackle cars. Doors slammed, engines coughed, and they were gone. I turned to Atticus, but Atticus had gone to the jail and was leaning against it with his face to the wall. I went to him and pulled his sleeve. "Can we go home now?" He nodded, produced his handkerchief, gave his face a going-over, and blew his nose violently. "Mr. Finch!" A soft, husky voice came from the darkness above. "They gone?" Atticus stepped back and looked up. "They're gone," he said. "Get some sleep, Tom. They won't bother you anymore."